Yeah. Kurt, you're here. Juan.
Okay.
Sorry, my bad. All right, if I could ask you to grab your seats again. Let me just say from that last panel, I want to express a special thanks to Skerry, Brian, and Dan Twining, who flew in earlier today and are flying back to Washington. So a special thanks to them. They are missing Miami weather, so sorry to them. We move right along with our next panel, which is immigration, finding solutions, obviously a subject of great interest here. My old friend Kurt Volker, former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, is the moderator. With him on the panel are Juan Gomez, director of the Carlos Costa Immigration and Human Rights Clinic, College of Law here at FIU. I'm doing this out of order, so I'll come back to order. Peter Skerry, professor in Department of Political Science at Boston College. Then Elisa Massimino, Robert F. Drinan, Chair in Human Rights, Georgetown University Law Center. And last but not least is Ann Richard, Adjunct Professor, Institute for the Study of International Migration at Georgetown. Kurt, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much, David. It is wonderful to be here.
I have to say it's actually wonderful to be on stage because I think it's the warmest place in the room. So this is great. The topic of this discussion that we're about to have is immigration, finding solutions. And I think the first thing we have to do with the immigration finding solutions is actually say, well, what's the problem exactly? And when you start thinking about what's the problem, it goes in a lot of different directions. You have an issue of global migration. You have immigration and immigration policy in the United States. You have refugees and displaced persons. And you have the treatment of people and human rights and how are these people handled. And just to give you a few numbers to think about as we start off, according to the UN, there are 272 million migrants in the world. So we're talking about people who have moved from country to country. That's a large number. They're 3.5% of the global population. But another number that's even more striking is 70 million displaced persons. And if you think about that, we are living at a time when we see more people forced out of their lives and out of their homes, sometimes out of their countries, than at any time in history. We see these people on the move. Over half of them, over half of the refugees that are in other countries are from 3 countries, Syria, Afghanistan, and South Sudan, which is also really striking. When you think about what this means for policies then, there's obviously got to be policies for handling refugees, policies for migration, policies for immigration of people who aren't refugees. And the country still today that has the largest foreign-born population is the United States. We have, according to 2015 statistics, the last ones I saw, over 12.5% of the U.S. population born in a foreign country, over 39 million people. That's quite substantial. So we are a nation of immigrants, and we are still a nation of immigrants. And so that also puts a premium on what is the right immigration policy. So to address these questions and any other questions that they want to address, and any other questions that you in the audience may have, we have a terrific group of people. We have Professor Juan Gomez, who is director of the Immigration Human Rights Clinic here at Florida International University, and we're very grateful to David and to Ambassador Green and to Dean Stack for being here. We have Professor Peter Skerry from Boston College, Department of Political Science, I believe. We have Ann Richard, who's a former Assistant Secretary for Population, Refugees, and Migration, and an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. And we have Elisa Massimino, who's a former Director of Human Rights First and is at the Georgetown Law School having a chair in human rights. So we cover the gamut of all of these different issues with all the people on this panel. And I guess the first question that I want to throw out to you is I just spent a little time describing the nature of the phenomenon and maybe a little bit of the nature of the problem. But in your own words, and maybe Juan, will start with you, what's going on? Why are so many people moving? And what are our responsibilities?
Well, I think you have a combination of push factors and pull factors. And one of the problems is that it's basically that
mic working?
It's almost...
We need a mic.
I couldn't afford the battery. My wife says it's best to not have the battery. Can you hear me now?
Light, there's a green, there should be a green light.
Well, while we figure this out, we'll get some technical assistance on stage, and I'll pose the same question to Peter. So give us a sense, Peter, of how you see the phenomenon here of global migration. We'll come back to you on. Okay. But give us a sense of what you see happening, this phenomenon of people moving, what's causing it, what are our responsibilities?
Well, I think obviously there are a lot of factors. I mean, we have political instability in various places around the world for sure. We have, I think, a factor that gets overlooked is we have increasing standards of living around the world. And while we typically think of immigrants as people being driven by desperation. The evidence historically and contemporaneously is that immigrants are the people who have aspirations, who have something, who want to get more. And so I think some of that is the factor too. Now, of course, to the extent that we're talking about more than just immigrants, we're talking about refugees and displaced persons, I think obviously we've got political regime instability around the world that's largely a factor.
And the two things that you said then lead you to two kind of different thoughts. One of them is if it's people looking for a better life because their country is, causing, some kind of economic challenge or other for them and they feel they can make a better life elsewhere, that leads you to a conclusion, well, that's nice, but why is that our responsibility? Whereas if you're talking about refugees, people fleeing conflict, people fleeing human rights abuses, you have a different reaction to that.
Yes. Well, I think for my money, that's the $64,000 question that we very seldom pose. I applaud you for posing it. And we almost never answer. Because from my perspective, there's a fundamental distinction that's not easy to draw, but that must be drawn, and that we seem almost incapable of drawing these days, between people who flee for their lives or for some very compelling, overwhelming reason, which we broadly define as refugees or asylees, and people who are coming who may be in some strained economic circumstances or have something to which they then aspire to more, and are migrants. We don't seem to be able to draw those distinctions, and our politics, to my mind, continually confound those distinctions.
Well, let's make an effort in this panel discussion. Let's try to draw these distinctions. And let me turn to Elisa. Let's take a look first at the immigration policy. So people who are voluntarily leaving, who seek a better life, who may have family members here. We obviously want immigrants. How many? What's the right number? How do we handle this? What about the immigration policy side?
Well, I think that, first of all, it's just great to be back here, and thank you all for being here. And thanks to David and FIU for convening all of this. It's really great for all these folks from Washington to come together and finally get a chance to see each other. I was thinking about this during the very first presentation of the Pew study. There was a question, I hope I don't, Jacob, mess this up, but about should we limit illegal immigration? Democrats are somewhere around 20% and Republicans somewhere around 63%. And to me, the framing of that question is a big part of our problem because it masks a lot of the fundamental questions that you originally posed, which is, so you'll hear people say, I'm in favor of legal immigration, I just don't like illegal immigration. But then we need to ask ourselves, do our laws make any sense? Do they serve American interests in any way? Are they connected in any way to our values? Do they uphold our values as a country? We don't tend to talk about those things. So that means that the debate about immigration is just about as broken as the immigration system itself, because we are completely talking past each other. We have, restrictionists that tend to claim we're a nation of laws, so we need to obey the laws. And you've got, pro-immigrant communities who say we're a nation of immigrants, so y'all come, everybody should come. And really, we have always been, and we have to be, both of those things, a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants. As you said, we benefit from it, we need immigrants. Study after study shows that we need immigrants. So we have to be both. Richard Land, I don't know if you remember, who used to head up the Southern Baptist Conference, he always said, we have two signs up at the border, no trespassing and help wanted. and we, as a country, we just haven't been able to sort out which, we need both. We need both. And then, of course, we also have the Statue of Liberty.
So let's pitch that to Juan then. So what's the answer?
I think the framing is that we have regular immigration and what you want to call irregular or illegal immigration. The only reason we have irregular immigration is because we didn't anticipate. It's almost like the person who thinks that the business curve is always going up and then doesn't anticipate a problem and doesn't plan for different needs. We have the Federal Reserve that manages monetary policy, but we have no one trying to manage in a practical sense who we need and who we don't need. And we have a problem because I don't think it's just a question of choosing opportunity. You have an element of that, and nothing's ever sort of monolithic, but you do have a situation where you have people leave where it's not working out. You leave because, or it's the same idea, you sell your used car because, not necessarily because you want a great new one, but because maybe the one you have isn't the best thing you have. In the countries where we see most immigration to the US at the moment, we see problems that we should have anticipated. But it's almost like we covered our eyes, and Europe is in the same situation because Europe should have known what was happening and what was bound to happen, because once you have a conflict, for example, you're going to have people fleeing. Once you have environmental problems, you're going to have people fleeing. I think of countries like Colombia, when you had the hottest times during the Civil War. Where did people think these people were going to go? And of course, we are that beacon, that city on the hill, and we promised people that we were going to have fairness and due process. And the truth is that the people who are anti so-called illegal immigration are also against legal immigration, because there's a certain know-nothingness that goes on that is then sort of like, oh, no, we need to have law and order or the rule of law. And that's not always true. It's significant how, not just restrictionists, but significant xenophobes who are part of the anti-immigration movement are here, and they are closely allied with the same actors in Europe.
Yeah, but to be fair to the argument, though, what you said is true, that we are the destination of choice, so we are the destination country in a lot of cases. People dislocated, whether it's by war, whether it's by economics, and there is a reaction here in our population say, enough, or too much, or why is it only us, or why too much are responsible? And that's the same argument, that's why you have Brexit, that's why you have the
message
EU.
Now?
Yeah.
Is that the message now? Because the thing is that people always say, oh, that's what the people are saying. Who are these people? It's like we the people. It's an abstraction. No, what's really going on is that you have this fear-mongering going on that, oh, can we take more? It's almost like, and you see it now in the media when they say, people are tired of the homeless. Well, the homeless don't just eat on Thanksgiving, you know. And the same thing is, well, what did you think would happen? What process? If we're going to have a legal system to allow people to come in, let's have a fair legal system.
Peter, you had your
Yeah, I guess I would disagree, and I disagree rather strongly. To be sure, there's lots of fear-mongering going on, and there's somebody in the White House who has played off of that and done that to great and negative effect, I would argue. But he hasn't done it alone, because what Donald Trump represents, in my opinion, is the culmination of at least 2 or 3 decades of our elites, business and governmental elites, promoting a pro-immigration agenda that refused, and still refuses in many ways, to acknowledge that there's any pushback, that there's any reason for large numbers of Americans, to have anxieties about the massive cultural as well as demographic and to some extent economic challenges of mass migration. My least favorite version of this, which I must dredge up as an example, I mean, is the Washington leaders for 2 decades, you know, gloriously talked about us being transformed into a majority-minority society. Doris Meisner, the immigration commissioner under President Clinton, probably the best immigration commissioner we've ever had, went around just willy-nilly saying we're becoming a majority-minority society. Well, how long do you think large numbers of ordinary white Americans are going to like hearing that their culture, their way of life, apparently are going to be challenged and undermined.
And at the same time, Ms. Meisner was the commissioner during one of the most anti-immigration phases in 1996. You had a reaction to the 1986 amnesty, and you had extreme restriction imposed by the Clinton-Gingrich administration, as I affectionately call it, and then every attempt by people who know what they're doing to come up with safety mechanisms. You have the McCain-Kennedy bill, you have all the efforts that were made to try to deal with problems a little bit at a time, and to try to create mechanisms. And if we think of the crises that we knew around the world in the 1980s, it wasn't a world of just, hey, everybody come on in, because the truth is that the law wasn't exactly fair all the time. It wasn't, hey, come on in, the doors are open. For more than 30-some years, the laws have been really harshly anti-immigrant.
Well, Anne should get in here, but those laws that are harshly restrictive, the numbers didn't show that. The restrictive laws that you're talking about was largely kabuki theater at the southern border.
Oh no, contrary.
Oh,
I've lived it.
All right, let's put a pause on this. I'm gonna come to Anne.
Yeah.
I'm just conscious that with Cindy McCain here, and thank you so much for being here and supporting this conference. I remember at least 2 major efforts by Senator McCain to lead a comprehensive immigration reform and not succeeding. And it was a genuine, hard-fought, bipartisan effort and not getting anywhere. Does anyone here see the prospects for any kind of bipartisan, major comprehensive immigration reform ahead of us?
No.
Don't forget what was said about, I think it was Senator Durbin saying, we're not going to get any kind of a deal as long as Stephen Miller is the representative of the White House. And so we have legitimate questions in the area of migration, immigration, refugees. And then we have a White House that is just shutting everything down. So there's issues that are controversial. There are issues that are not controversial, but we still see the White House shutting the door to people coming to the United States. Migration is a human phenomenon. There's a lot of positive benefits from migration that are completely not controversial. Business people coming and investing here, students from other countries studying at our universities, not controversial. Tourists coming, you don't have to explain this to a Florida community, so I'll just do it for anyone listening in. There's a lot of positive. This is all migration. One of the things the U.S. has been a leader on is speaking out against exploited migrants, people who have been trafficked, as we're going to talk about later today, people who are smuggled in so that criminal enterprises are benefiting from that. And the U.S., in the human rights world, in the world that I was in, spoke out against and were leaders in saying we have to manage migration. Instead, what we see has happened is too much fear-mongering and the idea that migrants are automatically criminals, that they are somehow a threat to us. Underneath that, if you listen to some politicians, there is this hidden layer of racism that's
Not always so hidden.
brown skin, anti-Muslim, anti-poor people, essentially. One of the legitimate questions, I think, about immigration is who do we want to bring to the United States? I don't buy this whole we are full, shut the door thing. We have a great story to tell about how immigrants to this country have revitalized our country. So who do we want to come? And a legitimate question, to look at is, under what circumstances? In the past, one of the things that was decided was we had discriminated against parts of the world, and so there were changes to allow people to come from different parts of the world. I personally think you don't have to bring in high-skilled people because I think we've seen it doesn't matter. People do well here, whether they're coming super skilled or not. But I know one of the policies being pushed in some circles is we need a more merit-based system the way the Canadians have.
One of the things
Elisa.
that I just wanted to pick up on something that Peter said about, the insecurities of Americans about immigration. I think we have to be careful there. There's a kind of a parallel to the previous panel about where we make statements where Americans don't support, U.S. And then we look at the polls and the way the questions are asked, and it turns out actually they do support that, and majorities of them do. And Pew does a lot of polls, and they also do some on immigration. And successive polling by Pew and other groups has shown that a majority of Americans actually, their views aren't reflected by the extremist rhetoric that is going on right now, that there's support for moving people out of the shadows, the 10.5 million undocumented, getting them on a pathway to citizenship. There is kind of this silent majority who believes we can solve these problems. One of the, just going back to the first point I made though about illegal versus legal immigration, unbeknownst to most Americans, this administration is transforming all immigration into illegal immigration by closing off the avenues for refugees to seek asylum. It's essentially stopped resettling refugees and allowing people to seek asylum. There's a human rights fiasco on the southern border right now with people under the euphemistically named migrant protection protocols that are basically forcing people who have fled for their lives to remain in Mexico. And hundreds of those people have been attacked, kidnapped, beaten up, raped, including children. It is a terrible scenario down there. Yeah. But mostly, it is an attempt by Stephen Miller, led by Stephen Miller, to shut down all immigration so that all immigration becomes illegal immigration. Yeah. People say, I'm all for immigration, people should just wait in line.
Okay, so I want to come back to the human rights
there is no line
in a second, but Peter, I saw you wanted to respond on the, I want to close off the discussion here with, again, what should the immigration policy be, and can we get there?
Okay, well, I'm going to take a step, hopefully, in that direction. To Elisa, I'm a little stunned at this point in time that you can claim that polls support for immigration. Clearly, lots of Americans support immigration, but just as clearly, lots of Americans don't, and they're pretty mobilized and pretty angry, and I don't think you can whistle past that. But having said that, how about talking about what we can agree on? I'll stipulate that Stephen Miller is not my guy, okay? Illegal immigration. What can we do about that? Because I think that's a real problem.
So
I think we've got.
I think there's a lot we can do.
But here's a solution to that, and the solution
What's the solution?
is that you don't have a mechanism for most of the people who find themselves trying to immigrate to the U.S. You have the family-based system and you have the employment-based system. Then you have the sort of little visa lottery over here, and you have asylum processing and refugee processing, right? Mm-hmm. The truth is that the numbers are significantly restricted. Understanding that we have a quota system. When anybody starts talking about uncontrolled numbers, I laugh because I go, what are you talking about? There are statisticians sitting in the Department of State that just spend a career deciding these are the numbers we're letting in every year. Now, we're being very sort of self-destructive in that we are hurting our commercial immigration. Mm-hmm. We're disincentivizing people coming to the U.S. as foreign students because there is not a future for you. You might not even be able to finish your studies because if there is another little situation where we start barring people or we create an anti-immigrant environment, you have no future. So the promise that we've had for decades of you come, you study, you might have a future in the U.S., that's fading. So we need to deal with commercial immigration as it helps our economy on one side, and we need to understand that individuals on something like a merit system could come to the U.S. but not using the same processes that we have now because they don't work. The process that we have now that's a problem is that most of the people who you would refer to as illegal immigrants are really just fleeing a crisis. They are not just leaving, they're not coming here to clean our homes, do you understand? They're leaving because their lives and their children's lives are in danger.
I disagree. You have no basis for saying that. I simply don't.
Central America?
Well, Central America is one part of the illegal
Okay,
immigration.
what other part do you want to?
Well, you do not know, you cannot sit here and argue seriously that the reason why all those Central Americans are coming because they're fleeing for their lives.
Because
you don't know that and I don't know
you
that.
not? Okay.
Some of them are, but you
Okay,
do not.
Okay, but do you really believe that any of these people, you sit here and you tell me this, and how many of these individuals have you sat with? How many of these individuals have you tried to get a fair hearing for? And they don't get a chance to tell about the gang member, the drug dealer, the corrupt police officer, the misogynist, the anti-whatever religion the person is, the homophobe. You keep going down the list, and you will see that a vast majority of these people are fleeing hell.
The vast majority of the people you talk to are.
Okay, no.
Why don't we talk about what we can agree on? Peter, you asked
Yeah.
what can we agree on, and Kurt, you did too. I mean, we can, on the issue of refugees, I think we can agree that we have an obligation, a legal obligation actually, the United States, but also a moral obligation to find out
I agree.
whether people who come seeking protection in America's arms, whether they have a claim under the law, and it's a very difficult standard to reach to be declared a refugee and to get asylum, but we have an obligation to find out. And right now, we are not doing that. So the first thing we can do, and I think we agree on it, is that we have to change the system we have right now under the Trump administration and start to do right by people who are asking for our help and find out whether they're eligible. I think that, you know, when you have a system that's so dysfunctional like this, it's not serving our interest economically, it's not serving our interests morally, and it needs a massive overhaul. I mean, Kurt, you asked, what are the prospects of legislative reform of this? I mean, you have to have two parties who want to work together to solve America's problems. We don't have that right now. You have to have leadership from the White House that wants to find a solution to this. We don't have that right now. So the situation is not right. But what we can do right now in the interim is stop violating people's rights, try to make sure that we are taking care of people who are entitled to protection under international and U.S. law, and start to plan to build alliances across party lines to solve this issue in a way that upholds our values and serves America's interests. And I actually think, and having served on a bunch of different task forces and efforts to wrestle this problem that have been bipartisan, that there's quite a lot of agreement on some fundamental principles. And that is not reflected in the political debate right now, in large part because there has always been an element of xenophobia and racism in our country from the very beginning. It's not a majority, but when you have that kindling there, and then you have an incendiary president like we have right now, lighting it on fire, it seems like a conflagration that is bigger than what I think it really is.
Yeah. Peter, quickly.
Yeah. I just want to respond because we're dealing with a very, very complicated human situation here when we're talking about migration, whether we're talking about immigrants or refugees. And we're dealing with human beings who make choices, even under extreme duress. And I would argue that many of the people coming up from Central America listen to conversations like this and hear people, either here or elsewhere, who are unwilling to make distinctions in their rhetoric and the way they talk about the way policy ought to be between what the motives of somebody who's looking for work, somebody who's looking for temporary work to save money to go back home, or somebody who's fleeing domestic violence or fleeing for their lives from political or gang persecution. Now, there's a whole lot of complicated motives there. The people who come up from Central America or other parts of the world who are migrating to Europe have complicated and mixed motives, which is why I would agree with Elisa, we have to do due diligence to make sure we find out what those motives are. But some of those motives are people merely seeking to come up here to improve their lives, and we don't necessarily owe them a damn thing.
But,
Okay,
but
so
if I may a second on that, one of the problems is access to counsel. People don't understand. Most people in this room, I'm sure, go to a professional to deal with their finances, you go to a doctor to deal with your health, and you go to a lawyer if you have legal questions. I assure you that the jargon in the immigration process, the mechanism, the nonsense, when you see the case law, when you see the policies, when you see the regulation, when you see the incentivizing of denying of applications, when you see the motivating of officers to, no, you go back across the border, when you see that system and that person is unrepresented, and what's even worse is that person is uneducated, that person has no idea how our legal system works, and how are we respecting our values, our system, when we are just processing people like widgets as opposed to human beings.
So
Well,
hold on.
I could answer that
I
if-
want to close off this part of the discussion.
Can I put it in a different direction, back over to?
Well, let me just
Anna?
let me just say,
Yeah.
I think I'd have two takeaways from this debate. One of them is it's not black and white. Who is coming here under extreme duress that you would say is a refugee or legitimately deserves asylum, and who is making a choice to come here because their circumstances are terrible. It's not a there's a spectrum here. And I think one of the policy questions that we as a country should grapple with is, how do we try to make sense out of this? Where's the line? And then the second thing that is related to that is how much of this is our responsibility as, United States, it's our job, as opposed to it's not our responsibility. Those are, I think, the policy questions there. But there's a third one, which Elisa brought up, which I want to come back to, and maybe this is where you want to go, which is there are certain things where I don't think there should be a debate about our responsibility, which is humane treatment and respect for human rights. And I think here we have actually seen with the child separation policy, with some of the things you described, Elisa, on the southern border, we're not living up to that standard either. And maybe that would be a good place to start on policy levels to try to get to these harder questions.
Sure.
Now with that, I'm going to pause there. You want to take a different direction, go for it.
Okay.
And then I have a follow-up in a different area, and I want the audience to be thinking about what questions you want to ask, because in about 10 minutes, we're going to turn to you.
Two quick things. One, I highly recommend, if you want to know what's going on at the southern border, there was an excellent report by my former organization, Human Rights First, that just came out a couple weeks ago, called Human Rights Fiasco. It deals with the Remain in Mexico policy and what's happening to the people who are being forced to remain in Mexico. It is horrific. Hundreds of documented cases. We are not coming anywhere close to living up to, and this is on all of us. This is our government that is doing this. So read it at your peril, but I urge you to read it. But I do want to it's very interesting that we're doing this panel on immigration in this State of the World 2020, which is mostly focused on US policy. We have panels on China and the Middle East and all that, and I just want to bring this back to, we always rush to the debate about the border when we talk about immigration and refugee protection. But, it's important to see this in the global context and what it means when the United States, you ask her, what's our responsibility? Why do we have to solve this problem? Rhetorically, I think you're asking that. We look at the world and we see that there is a global refugee crisis that is larger. More people have been forced to flee their homes than at any time on record since World War II, more than that. And And that's a problem that can't be solved by any one country, no matter how powerful. It requires cooperation. It also requires American leadership. And the most powerful kind of leadership is leadership by example. We cannot do our job as a country to help solve this problem globally. The solution is not the United States should take everybody. It's that we should lead to create a diplomatic and protection solution that brings countries together to do that.
And that's pitching it to Anne,
Yeah.
because that was your
Yeah,
job.
'cause we-
How's it going now?
As we look at the globe, this phenomenon that people are moving for lots of different reasons, and sometimes for more than one reason, is global. That's what happened in the Mediterranean. We had people who would meet the definition of a refugee, and some who would meet the definition of an economic migrant. But some people had seen devastating climatic conditions at home, drought, couldn't eat, poor, and their governments were oppressing them. So this is not just happening at our border where people are moving for more than one reason. The answer is careful screening when people come in, but the answer beyond that is to look at what is forcing them to move in their home countries. And that's why we have diplomatic instruments and tools and development agencies and humanitarians who try to prevent them having to move in the first place. And so that's a very, very important part of that. I think what's happening in the US is that we see swings based on reaction to the headlines. A couple people here witnessed with me the incredible animosity to refugees when they were falsely accused of being part of the Paris attacks of 2015. We see now that President Trump has said that governors should have to approve whether refugees come in or not, that 41 governors have actually said it's okay. And the other 9, including the governor of this state, have yet to say. And it's being taken up in the courts, whether that really makes any sense to have mayors and county executives and governors all individually decide whether refugees.
like 15, I think 15 of them are Republican governors.
Yeah, of the 41, that includes Republican governors, like the governor of Utah, who came out and said they're welcome here.
Let's stay on the global side of things for a minute, because 70 million displaced persons is a lot of people.
So 70 million are forcibly displaced.
Right.
And of that, 40 million are still in their home countries.
Right.
And so they're the internally displaced persons. One of the bigger issues we've identified when we look at the humanitarian response is that the responsibility for helping them lies with their own governments, and they are being neglected from the rest of the world by and large. The refugees, and there's roughly 26 million refugees, they've been displaced from their homes and they've crossed an international border. So they have a convention that requires us, those of us nations that have signed on to it, to provide them with protection. They also have an agency, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, agency headquartered in Geneva, that is responsible for helping them. So they have more protection, but they're looking to us in the international community to provide them help. I should also say that this is another example, we talked about this in the previous panel, where the US Congress is providing more funding to help refugees and displaced persons than the Trump administration is asking for.
I just want to add a couple dimensions to this. If you want to comment, that's great. If not, but when you look at the displaced from country to country as well, you're seeing real geopolitical impact from that. You look at Lebanon and the millions of refugees that they've had to take from Syria is a huge percentage of the total population of the people in Lebanon. Same thing with Jordan. You look at the impact of even 1 million refugees in Germany, and it's completely turned upside down German politics.
Well, this is the key for our diplomatic engagement with other countries, is what are we modeling, and then how are we helping? So if we go to, as I did, to Lebanon and say, please don't push Syrians back to Syria, they could get killed, they're going to say, what are you doing to help?
Yeah.
You know, our country is full. And one of the things we do to help is resettle refugees in the United States, but it's just a little fraction of the world's refugees. they would say, you're just taking a very small number, and then I would always be able to say back, well, yes, but when they come here, after a number of years, they can take the test, they can become citizens, and they're just as much an American at that point as I am. And then in addition to that, we would be providing a lot of assistance. We're the major donor through the top international aid agencies that care about these folks.
And the other dimension to this, too, is that you can't separate the refugees from the cause. So if we have intervention in Libya, we remove Gaddafi, the regime falls, that's probably a good thing. But without support to help the country stabilize, collect arms, create a responsible
The real
government,
solution is that we need more peace all around the world.
that's right. So I think it connects directly to foreign policy, national security, U.S. engagement in the world on the geostrategic side,
Absolutely.
as well as the impact side on refugees.
But we envisioned this, I'm sorry, we envisioned this back in the 80s. You had the Declaración de Cartagena. You had the idea that we would try to solve the source problem, and that we would sit with the people who were being affected, and then the truth is that that never went anywhere. We've never tried to resolve source problems, really. And then you end up with multi-generational refugee camps. Think of Kenya, think of other places that
Sure,
we don't need to go
Pakistan.
through the list. And then even better, we know that in certain holding pens, if you want to, the refugee camp in Chiapas during the Guatemalan Civil War did not work. It was not going to work. And the question is, refugee camps might be a sort of short-term emergency solution. Refugee processing is not necessarily a solution. But see, we're not the only country that's going through this. If you think of how Brazil's treated the Haitians, and you have, some people would argue Chile is having its situation with Haitians post-earthquake, that's an example. If you see the flow from one country to another, depending on whatever crisis is going on, you see that at one point, all countries tend to react somehow. But the thing is, though, that we really thought we had a system of laws that we would follow up on. And the truth is that we are at this point gaming those laws. The laws, like not just the US, but in other countries, you have organizations that have spent decades trying to promote their agenda, which is what the anti-immigration movement is here in the US, and is true in Europe also, in that they are now in power and able to implement using the crisis model. And look at Venezuelans in the crisis that's happening in Colombia and other surrounding countries. Are Venezuelans really going to be long-term resettled in countries like Colombia? Not likely. Where do you think they're going to go?
Yeah. Peter, you wanted to comment, and then I'm going
Yeah.
to turn it to the audience.
Well, I just wanted to say, make it clear, I believe we have important fundamental responsibilities to large numbers of people around the globe who are genuinely in refugee or asylee status. And by the way, that very category is in the midst, is a highly contested category. There's all sorts of efforts to push it, expand it, and I'm not sure that it shouldn't be expanded to some extent. But that's one thing, to assert that and to say that. But pretty quickly, I think these discussions get off into la-la land, because there's only so much that we can do. I take Juan's proposal as a kind of legal services arrangement for the world. We simply are never going to be able to provide adequate legal services for all the people who would want to try to come here and make some claims against us. Which isn't to say there aren't people who need legal help, and that there aren't people who have overriding and serious claims to come here as refugees. But it's very easy to get off into very deep and turbulent waters in these discussions, and I think this discussion is somewhat illustrative of that.
May I respond to that,
Yeah,
though?
please respond quickly, and then we'll...
It's not proposing legal services for everyone. Once you complicate the law to the point where you can't understand it, you need a lawyer. for goodness sake, I mean,
Should we get rid of lawyers?
well, my dean over there will be very upset at you. But no, this is the problem. The law in the process is extraordinarily complicated, right? And we know that most people have no idea. My favorite thing is to ask my students to make an envelope, and the next generation has no idea how to use regular mail. I mean, forgive me for those students who disagree with me, but it's an amazing thing because it's silly things like notifying the government of your address. Well, if they don't know where the exact address is, you could end up deported. You could end up without an actual hearing on the merits of your case. And this is why you need the lawyers.
But let's just quickly on resources. We have a president who deployed the military to the southwest border. That's a very wasteful use of resources when once again, a proactive, more humane approach to the southwest border would not have required that. Not that it was even required.
Right. Okay, but we have people queued up now to ask some questions, and I really want to hear from them. So we'll start on this side, and please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Drinan Stenbach. I am an FIU alumni. I am thankful to be here, and I'm also thankful to be here in the United States of America. I am grateful to those who have paved the way for me to be here. As part of the Florida community, as a Black, female, Haitian woman, and by the way, Haiti is just around the corner from here, from Miami. I came here at 19 years of age in 1986 as a tourist. I quickly became displaced and homeless in an attempt by others to make Haiti great again and to make Haiti become a democracy. I agree with Mr. Skerry, I think, who said, they don't owe us anything. You're right, you do not owe me a thing. But I do want you to know that I did clean homes. I did have to babysit. I did have to do a lot of hard work in order to earn my way to be here. If I could go back home today, I would, if Haiti wasn't the way it is now, because of those who wanted to bring democracy in Haiti, I would be there. But I can't go back right now. Now my question for any of you is there hope for Haiti so I can go back, because I want to go back? What is the role of the United States in regard to the globe, but specifically in regard to Haiti? You see, today, I am a graduate of FIU with a master's degree in disaster management. I worked hard to be where I am today. I am a teacher. I educate students. I wanted to be here. I took off 2 days from work to be here. I wanted to have a voice. So I do want to say thank you to everybody who's here. In whatever way you have made a way, you have paved the way for me to be here. I want to say thank you, because I didn't want to be here. I was 19. So I know there's a long line. I do want to say thank you to those of you who have exhibited compassion and love and mercy and grace. And for Mr. Skerry, it's okay. I just will pray for you. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your willingness to pray for me. I can use it. But I don't think you really understood what I was saying. I don't know any more about your particular situation than what you described, but I didn't say we didn't owe you anything. I didn't say we didn't owe anything to Haitians fleeing particular situations in Haiti that we, well, as Americans, may be complicit in. I'd have to know more about your specific situation, but I'm not opposed, as I said several times, to the notion that America has obligations to populations that are endangered around the world. I didn't maybe emphasize that in Central America, like General Kelly when he was at the head of Southern Command, acknowledged that we have incredible responsibilities in Central America, given the wars in Central America and given our drug habits. So I think you misunderstood what I was saying. I was saying that we do have responsibilities to people around the world, especially people who are impacted, who've been impacted negatively by our policies. But
Mr. Skerry, I understood. I'm educated. Today I am. I understood exactly what you said, and it's okay. I just want you to know that. But I do want to say thank you to Mr. Gomez for mentioning the Haitians, because there was a lot of talk today about Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, everywhere else except for Haiti. Haiti is right around the corner. And you know what? It's okay. Thank you.
Well, no, it's not okay. No, it's not okay, because you were suggesting that I didn't really have any sympathy for somebody in your situation, and that's not true. It's not true, and I don't want to be singled out the way you singled me out, because you didn't listen to what I had to say. And what I said is we have substantial responsibilities, but there are necessary limits. And what I was hearing from some of my fellow panelists were that there were no realistic limits being put forward. And if we don't have realistic limits, we won't have anything, because we'll get the reaction from the American people that we have right now, which, contrary to what you may think, I am not happy about.
All right,
But if on the Haitian issue, though.
very quickly, is there hope for Haiti was the question.
Well,
is there hope for Haiti?
Hope is that we keep fighting, because the only reason that there is temporary protected status today for Haitians, for Hondurans, for Nicaraguans, for El Salvadorans, is because the federal courts are still open, and the federal courts are keeping it alive, so that temporary protected status exists despite an administration that wants to close off programs that are still needed. And it took decades. In the 1980s, Haitians were just labeled as economic refugees when they were not. And it took decades of fighting in the courts to finally get even a semblance of due process. And even today, it is a joke how Haitians are processed in our immigration system. And so the truth is that we still need to fight in the courts. We need access to the courts. We need just courts. We don't need stacked courts by people who pass litmus tests to just support the values of the people in certain type of legal organizations that only want certain rigid values enforced.
Thank you. We're going to go that. I'm going to take a stab at it very succinctly and say, yes, I think there is hope for Haiti because of people like you. You have worked hard. You have built yourself into something formidable as an educated person. You play a role in this country, and I have no doubt that you can play a role in Haiti as well. So I think there's hope for Haiti. We'll take it over on this side.
Is this thing on? Yeah, okay, great, thank you. Hi, my name is Nicholas Eli Velazquez with the Mall UN team here at FIU. And I have a very quick question for the panel at large about a possible immigration compromise. So presently there are over 700,000 DACA recipients in this country. I myself have the great fortune to know one of those individuals on our team. And that individual is very limited in his access to opportunity due to his status. And a lot of these DACA kids are Americans in citizenship only. However, I find it very disturbing that we can take in more immigrants annually without first addressing these DACA kids who are already Americans, essentially. They speak English, they're integrated within society. And do you think there could be a possible compromise between both parties to limit our intake of immigration as we are integrating those DACA recipients?
Okay, so I'm going to, we'll take that question. We're going to take one more question, and then I think we'll have to start wrapping it up. But I'm going to paraphrase the question. Is there a deal to be made?
Yes.
Is there a political deal to be made where we deal with those who are here already, the DACA, and we put off broader immigration. So that's the question.
Yes.
Elisa, you're going to answer.
Do you want to take a few? And so
Yeah,
we can
yeah, I
get
am, but you're going to answer that
Okay.
one. Yeah.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Kimberly Augustin. I now have a international relations and political science degree here from FIU. I am the first in my family to have that degree. Neither of my parents even finished high school. And speaking about immigration makes it very personal, especially here in somewhere like Miami. But the narrative of immigration is always, right now in this administration, seen as the border and, you know, something that's taking a lot of money from American people. But immigrants put a lot of money into this country, and this country needs immigrants, and coming to this country is not easy. And coming to this country as someone who has the aspirations, that narrative is never, you know, publicized as much. So you have the image of immigration as people coming here and wanting to take something. And most immigrants come here and give something back. And in more cases that I know, more immigrants are not going back to our countries because we cannot, or if we go back to our countries, we're struggling, or we're seen as a threat in our own countries and could be a target. So you're here now working and putting in to this country that you have to defend yourself to the very people in this country that don't see you as American. But when you are outside of this country, this is the only place that looks inviting, and it looks like you can be an American. But when you're here, you're met with so much opposition as an immigrant. So the question is, how can you go about changing that narrative so that people see immigration in a positive light? Because I haven't met an immigrant yet that is not putting something positive into this country.
Right. Okay. Thank you. We'll go one more over here, and then that'll be the last question, I'm afraid. We're out of time, and we'll come back to the panel. Yes.
Hi, my name is Michael Lopez. I'm part of FIU's Model United Nations team. This question is in specific to Ms. Massimino. You asked, do our immigration laws make sense? Do they serve our best interest? What do you believe would be the legal and constitutional repercussions of federal immigration reform versus allowing states to follow suit with their own immigration policies, taking into consideration the 10th Amendment?
Okay.
Okay, Elisa?
Okay, trade-off between DACA and other immigration. I don't think we need to do that. I mean, the DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, was an administrative action that the Obama administration took. It's one of countless fixes to a broken system that is like a Band-Aid that's not going to fix the system. It's to try to alleviate the unfairness and the pressure on a system that's fundamentally broken. And it was not a fix that really ended up giving, and I think the Obama administration knew this, was not going to be permanent because it wasn't in legislation. I do think that there is a core consensus in the country and even in the Congress that these, mostly kids still, but young people, are an asset to the United States and ought to be protected. So that's, I think, where we should start and work from. Again, right now the system is so dysfunctional that it can't solve any problems, but we will get there, I'm quite confident. And changing the narrative was the last thing, right? I think that the narrative is changing. The Dreamers, there are lots and lots of people who know, anybody who knows immigrants has a positive immigrant story. It's just a fact. Even people who are spouting Trump-like, anti-immigrant, xenophobic, racist, will say when ICE comes for, the immigrants in their community, well, I didn't mean that guy. Not the guy who runs the bakery or the guy who's the dry cleaner. No, he's part of our community. But I mean those illegal people. So somebody in the previous panel said one of Trump's greatest assets is American ignorance. And that's where we have to do a better job of raising up the narratives that exist in communities around the country. Oh, and the federal, that was the last thing, was do I think one of the solutions is having more power over federal immigration law at the state and local level. I don't. I think it's a quintessentially, constitutionally a federal issue, and particularly it's one of the things that a government exists to do, which is to, you don't have a country unless you have borders, you got to police borders. So I'm not sure that that's, but it is quite heartening what Ann pointed out about when you ask states, do you want more immigrants? Do you want refugees? These are people who, if you're starting a country from scratch, you want them on your team. So maybe we can start to end on a positive note, which is people in the world vote with their feet. The fact that people want to come to the United States, I mean, we should start to get worried when they don't want to come, I guess is what I would say.
Okay, so thank you very much, Elisa. We're out of time. I know there's a couple more things to say here, and I like your idea of ending on a positive note. So what I'd like to ask each of you to do in very, very short framing, give me one recommendation that you would like to see our country do now. Something that would make a positive difference in the way we handle any of these issues that we've talked about. But give me one concrete recommendation, and we'll start, Peter, and work our way down to Ann.
Okay, it builds on the question about DACA. There won't be a deal in the near future, but there should be a deal about DACA. More generally, I would argue, political realities to one side, that we ought to do something about the 11 or 12 million undocumented immigrants in America. We are complicit in that. They're here because we let them be here, because we want them to be here. We should make them legal.
Very good. Thank you. Juan.
There's a precedent for a solution, a bipartisan solution, and that was in 1998. You had Congressman Diaz-Balart, and you had Congresswoman Carrie Meek, and you had HRIFA, which was the Haitian Refugee Immigration Fairness Act. You had the Nicaraguan and Central American Relief Act, which wasn't just about Nicaraguans, it included people from all Soviet bloc countries. And it was a bipartisan solution, and it included elements that would allow prospective solutions so that people could also include their immediate relatives. The DREAM Act has a flaw, as many of it has, because it's not prospective. Any immigration law that does not have a prospective solution has a major weakness to it because you're not addressing the problem, you're just creating tomorrow's problem.
So comprehensive law. Elisa?
Okay, it's easy. Raise the refugee acceptance ceiling to be commensurate with the global crisis so that America could credibly lead, and fully fund the immigration court system. That will enable, restrictionists will like that because you can deport people faster, but it'll also make it such that people who are entitled to relief can get that without waiting for years in anxiety, worrying about their families.
Very practical.
But with lawyers,
Very
right?
practical. Thank you.
You're going to get people lawyers.
Yeah, I also agree that 18,000 refugees per year coming to the U.S. is a ridiculously low number, and we should change that immediately. We should have a clock ticking with temporary protected status so that whatever number of years you want, at that point that the clock goes off, 7 years, 12 years, if people still can't go home, at that point they can stay for good.
Automaticity.
Because they're so clearly part of our communities at that point. And I agree, more getting the word out about how we benefit and how other countries could benefit from being more open-minded about immigrants and refugees. And good examples like Hamdi Lucayo of Chobani, who hires refugees. It was an immigrant who came to this country, and Chobani, everybody's eating Chobani now, and he's hiring people.
Yeah.
So.
All right, well, this is an issue that is extremely complicated just to understand. It's got political and security complications. It's got human rights and moral complications. It's got domestic political complications. Please join me in thanking this panel for walking us through that.